So, in speaking of a society collapsing, we were talking about Rome burning. We titled this episode "Rome is Burning." Um, what are you seeing? Are you seeing parallels where we're at now with what was going on with the fire?
Well, I guess the one major parallel I see is, first of all, it was kind of strange that the mayor was out of town, and she wasn't slightly out of town, like she was in Africa, so
Right,
it's like a little long distance, and she had some prediction, like basically they had an idea there was already a red flag warning out, which means
right.
high fire danger.
Yep.
They had some prediction on when the Santa Ana winds are coming in, and she decides still going to go to Africa. Sounds like a great idea. If you look at the fires of Rome. Um, and once again, if you look at a society like that, like these fires were happening quite often, right?
Right.
They're happening like every 8 to 10 years. You're having a major fire in a place. But the one that's considered to be the most well-known fire is the one that happens in 64 AD. It's the one that happens during the rule of Nero.
Yeah.
And by the way, little fake news on the whole idea of Nero fiddling while Rome burned. The first mention of that idea of Nero fiddling while Rome burned was actually the historian looked into this. His name is Anthony Barrett. He traces it back to a 17th century Parliament, English Parliament MP, that they were looking at a minor problem in Tangiers, and they were at the time the bigger problem was succession of the king. They were looking at would Charles II be succeeded by his Catholic brother James, which would be a huge problem for them. And he said, we could continue to be distracted by this, or we could, as Nero was fiddling while Rome burned, or we could handle the situation. So just a little fake news
So,
there on
are we
the
going to have
Nero
a?
fiddling while Rome burned
Are we
thing.
having a
Um,
Emperor Nero redemption arc? Is that what you're saying?
so I am on a bad emperor redemption arc, and
Okay.
here is why.
Yeah, let's hear
Um,
it.
so, and then I'll bring us back to Nero. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah, sweet.
I
I love
have to
it.
do this because so if you look at what are likely considered to be the worst emperors in Roman history, you can name them with less than an entire hand: Nero, Caligula. Well, I could throw Caracalla in there, and then you could also say Domitian. Now, if you look at, let's say, Nero, Domitian, and Caligula, the interesting thing about all three of them is they're very anti-Senate.
Hmm.
Now, if you look at, we'll go back to what I was talking about to Hotep about yesterday, 'cause this sent me down a rabbit hole. Um, During that point in time, about 10% of society is patrician, or the people that actually have money, and also about 10 or 15% is literate.
Hmm.
So you can probably assume who are the ones that are literate, right?
Right.
It's the people with money. Um, where are your historians coming from? Well, historians have to be able to write, correct?
Right.
So Nero, Domitian, and Caligula were very anti-Senate. So the people writing about them weren't going to like them very much. Now, does it mean they were nice guys? No. Does it mean they were as bad as they were? Likely not.
Right.
And if you taking that viewpoint, there's actually a great documentary series on Prime about Caligula. If you truly understand, like Caligula was actually the ultimate troll.
Hmm.
Like he was just trying to, kind of f with the Senate as much as he could, and it just kind of do stupid things to them, embarrass them. So if you understand that viewpoint, you realize, okay, they likely may not have been that bad. Anyway, so that's my redemption arc on bad emperors. They may have
So,
actually just been very anti-Senate.
right. And so their critics are the ones who are writing the history. And
Yeah,
then, so you're saying that's possible. It's fake news. I mean, I want to go back to the fires, but I'm
I'm
fascinated
not
by
saying
this.
they're angels, but yeah.
Right.
Anyway,
Like, would you say that all of the stuff, like, people talk about Nero killing his mom and his girlfriend or wife, right? And then making
so
that young boy dress as his dead wife. Is like, do you believe these stories?
So the thing I'll say about his mother, the Senate actually applauded the death of his mother because he tells the Senate, well, she was going to overthrow the city of Rome and put
Hmm.
herself in charge.
Hmm.
And Rome kind of has this once again, this is not another redemption arc here, but it has this anti-woman feel to it, of women in power, of this
Hmm.
idea of women controlling men to it's where also the idea of like women being poisoners comes from. Is a lot
Right.
of this very similar arc.
Right.
So her trying to take power would have been upsetting to the senatorial class. So
Hmm.
they actually applauded the death of his mother.
Right.
They don't applaud his behavior after, which is extreme. And if you look at what's happening with the fires of Rome, Nero is actually out of the city. That's the comparison point I was making to the mayor of LA. At that time, he's in Naples, and he's traveling the Roman world and playing his lyre for people. Now, you have to also consider, did people really want to see him play his lyre, or were they just afraid they were going to die if they didn't?
Yeah, he's forcing them. Yeah, sit here and watch me play.
So he's traveling around the Roman world, and this fire breaks out. It breaks out likely in the Circus Maximus. Right. The Circus Maximus, the whole top level, the stands where the poor people would have sat, was wood. So it would have spread very, very, very fast. Okay. And it starts to spread from there all over the 7 hills of Rome. The Circus Maximus, by the way, is not far from the Palatine Hill, which would be where the palace is. Okay. The only reason Nero decides to come back, as he goes from Naples to another resort city to continue playing his lyre, is he hears about the gardens of Maecenas are being threatened, which are next to the Domus Transitorius, which is one of Nero's several palaces. Right. So he says, oh, my house is going to burn down. I got to go back. So he goes back, and he actually starts to take control of the situation. You know, he's taking some of the poor people that have lost their homes, and he's putting them in the Campus Martius, or the Fields of Mars. He's helping to bring in more supplies from Ostia, which is where Rome's port is, which is not too far from the city. He does something about grain prices. At that point in time, he helps to lower grain prices to 3 sesterces. Sesterces are like the small pieces of silver you would use to pay for something. Okay. So he does a pretty good response right away to handle the situation. Now, once he gets it done, the way he handles things are where people start to get a little suspect of him. The way most people lived in Rome during this point in time, if they didn't have money, as I mentioned, about somewhere between 85 to 90% of people would not have been patrician. They would have been plebeian, or kind of the lower side of the plebeian class. Mm-hmm. They lived in these apartment buildings that were called insulae. And they were these tall wooden buildings that the rich people would have some sort of plumbing in their house. The insulae would not. People would pee and crap in a pot, and they would pour it out the window. Mm-hmm. That's why when you see people being carried in the street, it wasn't because they didn't want to walk. It's because they didn't want to walk in crap. So these insulae smell terrible, right, and they're packed. Like, to give you an idea of how many people are in this area, you have about 70,000 people living per square meter, or square mile, sorry. Wow. So like, that's kind of what square meter would be insane. Can you imagine 70,000 people in a square meter? That's
or vacui, I think they call that. Yeah, that sounds terrible.
No, square mile. So it's very, very, very densely packed. Right. And what ends up happening is when these insulae burn down, the fire's over. It clears out in about 9 days. It's supposed to be over in 6 days, right? It started slowing down, but it pops up again near the home of Nero's Praetorian Prefect. The Praetorian Prefect is the guy in charge of the Praetorian Guard. So he's kind of like the top military guy who's subservient to the emperor. Mm-hmm. So it burns for another 3 days after that. They get it out after 9 days. And Nero says, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the way we build a lot of things in the city. That's a really good idea, right? Mm-hmm. We should use it because most things were built from wood in this time period. So he starts helping to come up with other construction methods. That's a great idea. Mm-hmm. The next thing he does is he builds something called the Domus Aureus, or the Golden House. And it is the largest mansion that anyone had ever built at this time in history. And he puts as much gold in it as he possibly can. And he's going to put a statue of himself out front as a god, naked, and about 10 feet tall. People were pretty upset about this idea because
is that not reasonable?
What's that?
Is that not reasonable?
Where all those apartment buildings were, where all the poor people were, there's now crazy. A really big house just for you with lots of gold in it and a naked statue of you. I'm pretty upset about this.
Wow. Is the statue still around?
So what ends up happening is after Nero's dead, you have a few like transitionary emperors, which get you through about a year or so. And after that, you have Vespasian is the next emperor after that. Vespasian is actually one of Nero's military commanders. He's actually the guy responsible for going and conquering Israel. Oh, okay. So he has gained himself a lot of money recently by taking out the temple. Okay. So he ends up taking over Nero's spot, knocks down large parts of the golden house or the Domus Aureus, takes the statue out front, changes the face and a little bit of the body, and that statue ends up being called a Colossus. And then he builds a building behind it that's still standing to this day called the Flavian Amphitheater, also known as the Colosseum.
Oh, wow.
So where the Colosseum is currently standing was built by Titus Vespasianus or Vespasian.
Wow.
And it was built in response to getting rid of Nero's Golden House. It takes about 10 years to build.
Wow.
From 69 AD to about 79 AD. And it's open just in time for Mount Vesuvius to blow its top.
Wow. That's crazy.
Jeez.
I hope we're not in that parallel. Wait, but real quick, are you saying that Nero was better than Gavin Newsom?
Wait, what?
Was Nero better than Gavin Newsom?
Doesn't sound
Well,
like it.
He was pioneering new ways of building buildings.
See,
you know,
like, he
look
cared a
what
little
Newsom
bit.
did to San Francisco, man.
Right, right. That's crazy. Do you believe? This is like 10 years into Nero's reign, right? When the fire starts.
Just about, yeah. This is 10 years into his reign, post his mother, because his mother Agrippina the Younger would have run a pretty tight leash on him. So he's actually
Right.
pretty well behaved in the first half of his reign. Actually, people really liked him.
Right.
It was when his mother went away that we got to know the real Nero.
Right. And do you believe the stories about him with that young boy who he dressed up to be like his deceased wife?
There's a good chance that that's true. There's a pretty good chance that's true. But once again, you have to understand where your sources are coming from. You know, it would have
Right.
been he was anti-senatorial, but at the same time, I don't know. Yeah.
Was it Tacitus who wrote an account of the fire that was favorable to Nero?
There would have been 3 different historians, but they're writing for different reasons. There was Tacitus, Cassius Dio, who's writing, you know, kind of much later, and also Pliny. This is Pliny the Younger, I believe. I always mix up the elder and the younger, but it's Pliny the Younger.
Okay.
He wrote the natural histories, so he's going to be writing from the viewpoint of there was something burning. Oh, and I learned about this bird. So like, for him, it's not going to be as much about the fire. The most direct fire written about is Tacitus.
And he says that Nero came back and helped. Basically what you were saying, right?
Yeah, he gives Nero a lot of credit, actually.
Is there a reason you think that Tacitus would have been in favor of Nero? Maybe that's not the full story.
Well, I guess the thing you have to understand is a lot of the things we know bad about Nero are written after Nero's dead.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? Like, you know, people get a lot of courage when the guy that could kill it could
For
kill
sure.
you for what you're saying is no longer around.
Right. They're exacting revenge when
Yeah.
he can't do anything.
So the sources do say what you're saying, which is correct. I am still a little dubious on the sources, knowing that there was an anti-senatorial bend to Nero. But he also blames the Christians and decides he's going to kill a whole lot of them.
That's right. And can you tell that story?
There's not that much to tell, at least from what I know about it. There's a very small Christian population at this point in time, because right now we're around the whole AD BC thing is interesting too, because it may be off by about 4 years.
Yeah.
You know, but some monk might have got the actual calculation wrong, but you're somewhere around like 40 years after Christ. So you're starting to have some Christians, right? But even if you go like almost 300 years down the road to the time of 200 years down the road to the time of Constantine in 305, the empire is only 2% Christian then.
Right.
So it's actually a very small number of people, and they call them the Christi, and he ends up blaming it on them, and that ends up being what happens to them.
Right.
But there is no like, people talk about, you know, torture and things in the Colosseum.
The
There wasn't a
lions.
Colosseum yet; it didn't
Right.
exist.
Right.
But there were public venues where terrible things were being done to Christians.
Yeah, like I think I read someone say that he fed them to lions, you know?
That's correct.
But yeah, so when you're looking back at the history and you're studying all of this, how do you know you're looking at something that makes you confident you're getting the correct history?
That's really hard too, because even the fall of the Western Empire is highly debated, right? 476 is always the classic date people give, is the Western Empire fell in 476. And there's so many fun theories with that one too, because people would be like, well, it fell when Germany fell in 45, or it fell when whenever America falls, like people like to have this idea, or fell when the Holy Roman Empire fell. But if you look at it, the debate it often rages on 476 as the date. But if you want to look at why, the last 70 years ish of Roman emperors, the emperor is a child, a teenager, or a really old man, somebody without power,
Right.
and they're actually being run by a barbarian king. So what ends up happening is somewhere around that 476 date, we don't know if that's the exact correct date, the barbarian king Odoacer ends up taking the final emperor, Romulus Augustulus. I guess that really shows where we're at now. If you take the classic founder of Rome and the first emperor and put it together, like, I am so good, I'm like Romulus and Augustus,
Right.
kind of really reaching there. But they take the final emperor and actually retire him and give him a pension and everything else. They don't kill him. But he's a child. He's barely 15 at this point in time.
Wow.
So he's retired, and Odoacer says, there's no more emperors, I'm the king of Italy. So then what ends up happening is a little bit further down the road, you're going to have Odoacer is followed by a guy named Theodoric. Theodoric is one of the more powerful Italian kings. Justinian, who's the Eastern Roman emperor, decides he wants to reunite the empire. So he and his general decide that they're going to basically, his general's name is Belisarius, take control of the Western Roman Empire. But in order to save the thing, we have to burn the thing. So that ends up being what happens is they try to do this whole reconquest. And who's going to be writing about history but Justinian's scribes? So it fell in 476, obviously, because it couldn't be his fault.
Right. Of course. The way you just described it makes me think of Build Back Better.